Hi, and welcome to our Human Resources training video. My name is Lauren. Here is a brief overview of the topics that we will dive deeper into today. HR 101, starting with developing an organizational chart. Next is hiring. We will review job descriptions, interviewing, onboarding, and then we'll go into employee handbook, some legal topics, and compliance. And finally, ongoing employee engagement and team building. So that includes engagement, employee retention, and team building exercises and strategies. Let's start with a brief introduction into what human resources is. Human resources is used to describe both the people who work for a company or an organization and the department responsible for managing all matters related to employees, who collectively represent one of the most valuable resources in any business or organization. Human resource management is a contemporary umbrella term used to describe the management and development of employees in an organization. It is the part of business concerned with recruiting and managing employees, also called personnel or talent management. The primary goals of human resource management are the facilitation of performance and to improve productivity with your employees. So let's take a look at the various components of human resource management. HR is often responsible for, among other things, the following: recruitment and hiring, so attracting, recruiting, interviewing, and hiring; appraisal, improvement, intervention; performance management and reviews; recognition, motivation, and engagement, also summed up into employee retention; training, development, career planning; employee safety, security, and workers' comp, so safety and wellness; compensation, benefits and policies, benefits and payroll; and then finally, equal employment, federal, state, and local regulations, also known as compliance. HR has a direct impact and effect on the company culture and workplace environment. They set the tone for internal communication, help to settle disputes, and much more. So you might be asking yourself, why is HR for small business necessary? Well, in any organization, at least one person should be designated as the HR contact. While certainly HR duties may be shared among several individuals, it is good business practice to identify at least one individual who is responsible for keeping up with any changes in employment laws and administrative practices, recruiting and monitoring, to ensure policies, practices, and forms are relevant and up to date. In smaller organizations, the overseer is often the controller or office manager, so this might sound familiar to you. They will typically have a thorough understanding of the business and its culture, be involved with the payroll function, and/or have a bird's eye view of the happenings in the organization. This individual should be trustworthy, credible, competent, and forward-thinking. It is essential that the HR contact takes that role seriously and considers it a vital process, part of their job, not simply an add-on of responsibilities. Without efficient human resources for small businesses, employee performance, retention, and loyalty, and commitment to their job role will only lead your business struggling to achieve its goals and objectives. So ask yourself, who maybe takes on this responsibility? And do you feel like they are upholding it well and staying on top of things? If not, maybe what is some additional training that you could provide to them? Could you have them watch this presentation as well, just to sharpen their skills? Now we'll get into section 1, organizational charts. So another question might be, why do you need an organizational chart? Well, here's a few reasons. It is easier to hire for different positions when you identify roles and responsibilities. It is critical for the company and the employees to know who is responsible. An org charts plus operations manual equals predictable outcomes and consistent results. Continuing on with organizational charts, Here are a few things to consider. The small business owner and their employees may wear several hats based on their skill set, so it might be hard to define them into one specific box, but having an org chart in front of you can help lay out and draw some clear guidelines. As a company grows, it is important to separate those duties into different positions as you hire new employees. So maybe that person won't be wearing all those hats forever, but what duties can you branch out into other aspects and other positions in your organizational chart? Next is, how many times have you heard or said, "I just need more help"? But what kind of help? What does that help look like? What are the KSAs, so knowledge, skills, and abilities for that help? And finally, you need to be able to put it on paper so others can see your vision. Don't be afraid to share this organizational chart with other members of the company, or if you're stuck, bringing in other members of the company to help you really lay out that organizational chart and maybe do some future planning. So here's how to get started and some organizational chart basics. What, not who, do you need? So if eventually you want to have a dedicated HR individual, maybe you branch off another aspect and write human resources. Maybe under that you write recruiter, just depending on your company's needs and your plans for growth. Next is, who will they report to? This is also important to share with new employees, so that organizational chart will inevitably begin to grow, and it helps employees to see, oh, this is my manager, and this is who my manager then reports to. Maybe again, right now it's a very small team, but it's still important to share that information. And finally, how do you measure their performance? So we've put together a sample organizational chart. Feel free to take some time and write this down on a piece of paper in front of you. You could see, above all else, we have our clients and our customers. And then we go down to the CEO, owner, president of the company. Then branched off from that, business development, operations, as administration. Down from administration, we have accounting and finance, and HR/recruiting. It's important to think functions, not necessarily people, as some people may have multiple functions, especially in a small business setting. But again, this can help you to further define roles as your company grows or as business needs and priorities change. The next section we will go into is hiring, employee handbooks, legal topics, and compliance. So when and how to hire additional employees. One of the most important tasks in business is workforce management, and this can sometimes be the most challenging. This means ensuring you have the right people and the right number of people to keep your company running smoothly. There are some clues that will help you identify when it's time to hire additional employees, and these may include things like employees letting you know or complaining that they have too much to do. Your task is to determine if they're legitimate by looking at attendance and productivity. Next is employees stating they would like to take on more tasks or spend additional time on current ones if they only had the time. So know what positions you need to hire for. What duties can you or other employees hand off? What duties can you group together? And this is again where the organizational chart comes in. It helps to use or refine a job description, and then next is finding those qualified applicants. So again, this might take some additional time listening to your workforce or just having conversations with your workforce to see, are they stressed out? Do they feel like their workload is too great? Are they unable to do the tasks that maybe they were originally brought on for? These are all clues that can help you to know when and how to hire those additional employees. Job descriptions. No state or federal law requires job descriptions, but job descriptions can be helpful tools for both practical and legal reasons. First, let's take a look at what job descriptions are used for. The job description should accurately reflect the duties and responsibilities of the position. When well written, it produces a realistic picture of a job and answers the question, what does this person in this role actually do? A job description not only describes the position's responsibilities, it sets the foundation for recruiting, developing or retaining talent, and also sets the stage for optimum work performance by clarifying responsibilities, expected results, and evaluation of work performance. It's also an important component in maintaining an equitable compensation system and ensuring legal compliance. Next, what are the essential components of a job description? A job description contains the following components: job title, job purpose, job duties and responsibilities, required qualifications, preferred qualifications, and working conditions. And finally, how do job descriptions evolve over time? Job descriptions should evolve over time as our workforce is continuously changing. Technological advances and changes may mean new skill requirements. Compliance is also always a challenge, and this may go without saying. But as we mentioned earlier, although job descriptions are not legally required, if you have them, they are crucial to ensure that you are providing the appropriate information that will keep you on the right side of the law. Compliance for requirements under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, the Family and Medical Leave Act, FMLA, and the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, should be reviewed. It is a good idea to use calendar reminders for compliance checks, or another system that you have found works well for you. Reviewing job descriptions are also a great way to check back in with managers and supervisors to ensure the job's essential functions, duties, and candidates' expectations maintain relevant. So revisit your job descriptions. What could maybe be tweaked or what has changed over time? Take some time thinking about this and having the individual that is in charge of this think about these aspects as well. So next, let's take a look at what a job description should include. Job description should include a general description, including duties and objectives, essential and non-essential functions, knowledge, skills, and abilities. Be as specific as possible. That will help give your candidate a clear idea of what they do or maybe don't have to be able to see if they're qualified. Exempt or non-exempt status, reporting structure, and measurable duties. So some examples are responsible for turning in daily reports to project manager and assisting with monthly reports for prime. Our next question with job descriptions is, where do you start? When writing a job description, start by finding the description or descriptions that most closely match what you need. This can be a quick Google search, or you can revisit old job descriptions that may still have useful material. Once you have found a useful job description to work off of, remove the information that does not apply and add specific duties. This is where it may be helpful to seek input from additional members of your team. Finally, determine the wage. If you're still unsure where to begin or would just like additional resources to assist in writing job description, visit this helpful resource, ONET Online, to search thousands of occupations and see a breakdown of common tasks, skills, knowledge, and more. Recruiting. This can be one of the most challenging parts of hiring. Some methods to find top applicants for openings include general job boards, current employee referrals, your own network, and internal mobility. What struggles have you had with knowing where to look for qualified applicants? Think about things that have worked well for you, or maybe some things off this list that you haven't yet tried. If you're wanting to know what the most cost-effective ways of job posting are, look at some of these free resources: LinkedIn, Glassdoor, CareerBuilder, ZipRecruiter, Indeed, Google for Jobs, Monster, Facebook Job Search or other social media, and Craigslist. And don't forget about your own company website. So once you've found qualified applicants, you can move to the next stage, interviewing. First, it is important to differentiate between different types of interviews. The most common are telephone pre-screen interviews. These are useful for assessing whether an applicant's qualifications, experience, skills, and salary needs are compatible with the position and organization. And then direct one-on-one interviews. These can be approached in several ways. 3 of the most common approaches are behavioral interviews, competency-based interviews, and situational interviews. So some examples of a behavioral interview: the interviewee is asked to provide examples from their past employment of specific situations and then go through how they behaved in those circumstances. An example of competency-based interviews: those are designed to test one or more skills or competencies. So for example, the interviewer has a list of set questions, each focusing on a specific skill, and your answers will be compared against predetermined criteria and marked accordingly. And then an example of situational interviews. So this is where candidates are asked specific questions about how they would handle certain circumstances at their job. The candidate is asked to assess the situation and to provide solutions on how they would go about handling it. And we also have panel interviews. So this is where a candidate is interviewed individually by a panel of 2 or more people. Usually these interviews are question and answer, but they can also include participation in an activity or a test. The number of interview questions you should prepare depends on what stage your candidates are in the interview process. Initial phone screens, for example, are often 20 to 30 minutes long, which means it's a good idea to prepare 5 to 10 questions. For longer in-person or video interviews, it's a good idea to come up with about 10 to 15 open-ended interview questions and expect to ask 6 or 7 within an hour as a general guide. When preparing and conducting interviews, just know it can be done in a variety of ways, but it's important to keep some basics in mind to maintain consistency. Some examples include starting off by introducing yourself. I personally have also found it very useful and appreciated to take the first 5 to 10 minutes at the start of an interview to build up some rapport with the candidate. It helps to loosen up their interview nerves and make them feel more comfortable. Think about previous interviews you've had, and really great interviews and some that weren't so great, and what made them great or not great. Ask the candidate how their day is going, if they had any trouble finding the interview location, and then of course if they'd like a glass of water or something to drink before starting. Next, give an agenda. Let them know how you expect that interview to go. Review the job. Start with generalized questions, meaning ask questions that facilitate discussion. Avoid questions that require a yes or no answer. As you go through, make sure you continue to review the applicant's resume. This might prompt some additional questions that you have. Make sure though you do have some consistent questions. This really helps you to compare each interviewer and each candidate. Make sure you're taking notes that can be later added to the employee's file if and when they are hired. And make sure you're asking those open-ended questions, again to help facilitate some of that discussion. Be sure to include those behavioral interview questions so candidates can elaborate on their skills and experience and display their abilities to tackle challenging topics. These types of questions will also help you assess a candidate's critical thinking and communication skills. Make sure you also give candidates a chance to ask their own questions. The purpose of the interview is twofold. First, you want to obtain as much information as possible in order to assess whether the applicant will be a good fit for the position and the company. And second, you want to take the opportunity to really sell the company to the candidate, being persuasive yet also realistic. And finally, provide a timeline. Let them know how fast or how slowly you expect to make a decision, and make sure you let them know that they will be notified either way. Really give that candidate the respect. that you would also hope to have in that type of a situation. Now let's take a look at the legal guidelines when interviewing. This is something that many people are unaware of, but it's crucial to make sure that you're staying in compliance and away from discrimination. Individuals involved in the interview process should be familiar with federal and state laws that preclude certain questions. Laws that protect workers include the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Federal and state laws require that companies make employment decisions without regard to protected categories such as race, age, religion, sex, sexual orientation, national origin, disability, marital status, genetic information, and other categories. Staying in compliance with these laws will help to keep the company out of court and will strengthen the company by creating a healthier atmosphere free of the damaging aspects of discrimination or harassment. A few examples are warranted. You cannot ask how old someone is in an interview. Instead, you may ask whether the person is over the age of 18. Even asking when someone graduated from high school elicits someone's age. An applicant's genetic information and questions about family medical history are also not allowable. Similarly, you cannot ask whether someone is disabled. Instead, you may ask whether they can perform the essential functions of the job to which the person is applying. Questions about family status, whether someone has children or has made child care arrangements during work hours, or the applicant's marital status are not job-related and should not be asked. In the hiring process, the goal is to gain as much information from the applicant while respecting federal and state laws. The guiding principle behind any question to an applicant is whether the interviewer can demonstrate a job-related necessity for asking the question, so make sure the interviewer is familiar with the position requirements. A good rule of thumb is if it's not job-related, don't ask. And now we've moved on to the verifying and offering stage of the hiring process. So what are the next steps after narrowing down your top candidates? Will you conduct a background check, drug testing, or other assessments before making your final selection? If you do choose to perform any of these evaluations, again, make sure you're checking with federal and state laws and regulations. In many states, employers have the legal right to test job applicants for drugs or alcohol, provided that the applicants know that the testing is part of the interview. In most cases, the testing cannot be conducted until the applicant has been offered the position, so make sure you keep that in mind. If running a background check, you must remain in compliance with the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the FCRA, by making sure to send an email to each candidate outlining the areas you'll be checking for. Also provide an attached document for them to sign electronically that confirms their consent to proceed with a background check. The next step would be to check those references. If you are conducting a reference check, make sure you have policies and procedures in place to manage the process. Many states regulate what an employer may say about former employees. These are described by employment reference laws. Always be sure to check what you can and can't ask. Here's an example of some legal questions that we can ask. How do you know John Doe? Would you rehire John Doe? Would you recommend any training for John Doe? Again, these are just some examples based off of our state. Always be sure to check what you're legally able to ask in your state. When conducting a reference check or acting as a reference, it's best practice to document the name and title of the person with whom you spoke, the date of the conversation, and what job-related information was given or received. And finally, the exciting part, extending the offer. Here's a few tips that will help you optimize the offer process. Cover important job details. Our offer letter should include job title, compensation, benefits, and expected start date. Make that job offer over the phone first. Candidates get the chance to bow out, for example, if they accepted another offer, or verbally accept your offer. And always use an offer letter template. There are so many great templates that can be found online and easily modified, so make sure you're using your resources. Onboarding your new employee. To kick off the employee onboarding process for a new hire, You need to prepare the relevant paperwork and information prior to the employee's first day. Here at PSI, we have created an onboarding checklist. This has been extremely helpful to ensure both consistency and accuracy when obtaining necessary new hire forms. You should always check required state and new hire reporting guidelines. New hire forms will include, among others, the following: W-4, I-9, so a question to ask, do you need to report to E-Verify? Again, check with your state. In every state, federal contractors and any of their subcontractors with qualifying contracts that contain the FAR, Federal Acquisition Regulation, E-Verify clause are required to use E-Verify. The specific details of E-Verify requirements vary state by state. To determine if your business is required to utilize E-Verify, check your local city, county, or state government laws. Something many employers may not know is that employees' I-9s cannot be stored in their personnel file. So to protect against discrimination claims, make sure you're keeping that I-9 and supporting documents in a separate file. New hire sheet. So this is helpful as one place that you can have their name, social security number, date of birth, and emergency contact information for their file, whether paper or electronic. Policy sign-off sheets. So examples include an at-will policy, confidentiality policy, and finally, are you required to report to vets or EEO information? Again, something that would need to be in a confidential file, but something to make sure you're double checking to see if that is a requirement for reporting. Now let's take a look at employee handbook and some helpful things to keep in mind. An employee handbook can be a valuable communication resource for both the employer and the employee. It provides guidance and information related to the organization's history, mission, values, policies, procedures, and benefits in a written format. It's also viewed as a means of protecting the employer against discrimination or unfair treatment claims. The employee handbook should follow a few basic guidelines, and those include keep it simple, keep it current, separate policies from procedures. So for example, policies will set some parameters for decision making, but they leave room for flexibility. They show the quote-unquote why behind the action. Some example policy topics include social media use, sick time and paid leave, acceptable work behavior, and code of conduct. Procedures explain the how. They provide step-by-step instructions for specific routine tasks. Examples of procedural topics include emergency procedures, material ordering, and equipment operation. They may need to be multilingual, and employees must sign off and acknowledge receipt and understanding. The employee's signed acknowledgement will show that the employee had an opportunity to familiarize themselves with the organization's policies, a chance to ask related questions, know with whom they could turn to for help within the organization, and agree to follow the terms and conditions of employment set forth by the organization. Here are some handbook do's and don'ts to keep in mind. Do note that these are general policies and not all-inclusive. Do note that these policies are not intended to contradict any current state or federal labor policies or changes in legislation. Do not imply that any position is permanent, and do not use words like all, always, probationary, guarantee, shall, will, or must. Do not include discriminatory statements. There are many helpful do's and don'ts for employee handbooks online, so make sure you're checking those resources. Make sure you're keeping your handbook current and referring back to it when needed. And now let's take a look at measuring employee performance. When it comes time to evaluate and measure the employee's performance, there are a few ways to go about ensuring that the data and information is collected and reviewed consistently and accurately. This includes reviewing job descriptions and the organizational chart. But it also includes checking in or setting specific measurable objectives that are accurate, relevant, and time-bound, otherwise known as SMART goals, work reports, construction daily reports, performance indicators, and if needed, a performance improvement plan. Think about what makes sense for your organization and how you go about measuring employee performance on the job. Employee termination process. We all wish that tools like the employee handbook and periodic reviews and check-ins could be the solution to avoiding any type of turnover. However, we know that this is not the case, and sometimes the next step after attempting to correct behavior or performance is unfortunately termination. Terminating an employee is almost always unpleasant. It's often awkward for the individuals involved, it's disruptive to work, and the infrequency of the situation makes it hard to become practiced. A sloppy termination process, however, can lead to legal liability for the company too. Saying the wrong thing or sending a final paycheck too late can leave you vulnerable to lawsuits from former employees. Employee termination laws vary state by state, and given the time-sensitive nature of some of these laws that govern your business, you can't afford to wait until you're firing someone to learn them. All of these difficulties are only made worse when you're not sure if you're doing everything correctly. An unclear human resources termination process can lead to additional uncertainty and anxieties. The solution to these problems? Plan your employee termination process well in advance, long before you ever need it. With a plan in place, you won't have to scramble to make sure things are done appropriately, legally, and safely. This slide showcases an example of the guide that can be used when an employee leaves your organization. You can also make a checklist document, so similar to the one that was previously mentioned with the onboarding process. Take a few minutes to look over this employee termination process. Maybe you don't have an IT department, but you have another department that would make sense to plug in there. Feel free to use this as a guide, or again, look online, see what other employee termination processes, flowcharts, checklists that other companies similar to yours have used to make sure their process is as efficient as possible and to make sure that you're not missing anything during those crucial moments. Labor law. The Fair Labor Standards Act prescribes standards for wages and overtime pay, which affect most private and public employment. This act is administered by the Wage and Hour Division. State labor laws cover items like meal and rest breaks, wrongful termination, and employee-employer resources. Whenever state and federal laws differ, follow the regulation that most benefits the employee as a guide. For example, if the state minimum wage is $7.50 and the federal minimum wage is $7.25, employers in the state must pay $7.50 per hour to be in compliance. And always, as a rule of thumb, make sure you're checking with those state regulations. So now let's take a quick look at an overview of the HR best practices. Things to consider when managing the HR function without a designated HR department. Make sure you're clearly defining roles and responsibilities of anyone involved in any HR-related tasks. For example, benefits questions, personnel record keeping, payroll, and on-the-job injuries. Assess training needs of anyone performing HR-related tasks and educate them as needed. And develop written policies and/or standard operating procedures to document important tasks. Subscribe to HR-related newsletters, publications, and alerts to keep abreast of legal changes. These are just a few quick tools to make sure that whoever is in charge of that role feels comfortable and has the ownership to make sure that they are staying in compliance and keeping your company and the employees protected. Finally, we are going to dig into Section 3, ongoing employee engagement, and team building. It is important to know that employee engagement is not the same as employee satisfaction. Employee satisfaction only indicates how happy or content your employees are. It does not address their level of motivation, involvement, or emotional commitment. For some employees, being satisfied means collecting a paycheck while doing as little work as possible. Employee engagement, however, measures how an employee feels about their organization. Based on their perceptions of their workplace, employees are categorized into 4 main groups. First, we have highly engaged employees. Highly engaged employees hold very favorable opinions of their place of work. When employees feel connected to their teams, love their jobs, and have positive feelings about your organization, they're going to want to stay and put in extra effort to help the organization succeed. These quote-unquote brand advocates speak highly of their company to family and friends. They encourage other employees around them to do their best. Next is moderately engaged employees. Moderately engaged employees see their organization in a moderately favorable light. They like their company but see opportunities for improvement. These employees are less likely to ask for more responsibilities and may underperform. There is something about the organization or the job that holds them back from that full engagement piece. Next is barely engaged employees. Barely engaged employees feel indifferent towards their place of employment. They usually lack a motivation for their position and will only do as much as they can to get by, sometimes even less. Barely engaged employees may be researching other jobs and are a high turnover risk. Then you have disengaged employees. Disengaged employees have a negative opinion of their place of work. They are disconnected from the mission, goals, and future of the organization. They lack commitment to their position and responsibilities. It's important to understand how to handle disengaged employees so that their negative perceptions don't impact the productivity of employees around them. Employee engagement has so many benefits, it's really hard to list them all here. But it includes things like increased employee productivity. Research even shows that engaged employees are 17% more productive than their peers. They're more likely to work diligently and expend discretionary effort in their jobs. They lead to higher employee retention. Engaged employees don't have a reason to look elsewhere for work. Engaged employees turn over less often because they know their work will be recognized for their contributions. They see opportunities for professional growth and career development. They understand when the organizational change happens and why. And these 3 pillars enable them to connect to the present and the future. They also lead to increased customer satisfaction. And 72% of executives strongly agree that organizations with highly engaged employees have happy customers. Engaged employees care deeply about their jobs and thus the customers. Engaged employees also lead to much lower absenteeism. When employees are committed to your mission, they're going to show up. Highly engaged workplaces see 41% lower absenteeism. You will also see better employee health. Engaged employees are less likely to be obese, less likely to suffer from chronic disease, more likely to eat healthier, and more likely to exercise. Having healthier employees positively impacts your bottom line. There will also be decreased workplace injury, and this is super important. Engaged employees are more aware of their surroundings and can focus on the task at hand. Research has shown that 70% fewer safety incidents occur in highly engaged workplaces. So let's take a look at employee engagement best practices. Make sure you're reaffirming areas of strength. There's always room to improve, but don't be afraid to highlight your strengths as well. Celebrate engagement with wins and socialize successes with current and prospective employees. When employees see meaningful action and improvement, they're more likely to be engaged. Tie engagement efforts to business outcomes. You need everyone to be on board to make your engagement plan a success, and that means proving real impact. Connect your engagement efforts to tangible business results such as turnover rates, sales, customer satisfaction, financial performance, and more. When leaders and employees see the impact of engagement, they're more likely to be invested in that process. And make sure you're making engagement a strategy, not just an activity. If you want to move the needle on engagement, it must be a continuous strategy, not a one-off project you set and forget. When engagement is only addressed every once in a while, employees don't feel heard or supported, and managers don't take it seriously. If you listen to your employees and prioritize engagement throughout the year, you'll see greater engagement and a better return on the investment of your time, energy, and dollars. Steps towards improving employee retention. Improving employee engagement can also help foster employee retention. How to keep core employees and see this job as a career, not just a job. Some additional steps towards improving employee retention include place everyone in the right role. So think about that organizational chart, refer back to it, and the company's overall objective. Check to ensure that the talent acquisition and retention strategies are aligned with those goals. Make sure that you're giving employees training. And set your team up for success. This means providing the proper training and development while removing obstacles. Make sure you're tasking meaningful work. Engaged employees are doing meaningful work and have a clear understanding of how they contribute to the company's mission, purpose, and strategic objectives. Again, this is why they first have to be placed in the right role. Don't be afraid to ask individuals if they feel like they're in the right role or if they feel like another role would be a better fit for them. Check in often. Today's workforce craves regular feedback, which can lead to faster course correction and reduces turnover. Use both formal and informal check-in strategies. Remember that the part of the role of human resources is to conduct reviews. Here at PSI, we strive to conduct a more informal 30-day review known as their check-in, and then follow up with a 60 and/or 90-day check-in and conduct a formal annual review. And make sure you're frequently discussing engagement. Successful businesses are transparent in their approach to improving engagement. It is important to note that one of the most common mistakes that leaders make to approach engagement as sporadic exercise is in making their employees feel happy. Employees need ongoing purpose and development. Engagement and retention efforts can be strengthened through team building. Team building is the process of turning a group of individual contributing employees into a cohesive team, a group of people organized to work together to meet the needs of their customers by accomplishing their purpose and goals. So how does team building work? Often the team leader or manager will facilitate a series of meetings at which employees get to know each other and develop a cohesive working relationship. In a larger organization development staff can lead the team building sessions. Many human resource practitioners are also comfortable leading team building sessions, and with little practice, teams can use another employee to facilitate the group session instead. But team building doesn't always have to be a facilitated meeting to accomplish the goal of the cohesive team. You can build your teams by structuring activities and fun events that team members can do together. Some ideas for team building activities include starting with a department picnic, maybe using a couple hours during the workday to visit a nearby park, grill some food, and suggest that employees bring a dish to pass along. The goal is that you gather together to share some quality time talking over the meal. If employees take their lunches to their individual offices to eat alone, it defeats that goal of team building. You can also sponsor activities where employees get together for fun. Bowling, painting pictures at a paint shop, sporting events, really any event that your team can do or attend as a group will help to bond them. And before we end today, I would like to finish out with a quote that I truly believe is one of the staples of business. Train people well enough so they can leave. Treat them well enough so they don't want to. Richard Branson. Some key takeaways include team building is the process of strengthening bonds between members of a group for the purpose of more efficiently achieving those group goals. Activities that promote team building can be as informal and casual as a shared meal or a formally structured session led by a facilitator. Successful teams can be more productive than individual contributors. These teams have more engaged employees, stronger workplace cultures, and experience less turnover. So some questions to think before we close out are: what strategies have you found useful in improving your workplace in terms of engagement and team building? Are there any that you feel may be more relevant to your industry that you would like to start implementing? Ask your employees, hey, what types of engagement have you done in previous jobs or on previous teams? What do you feel like we may be missing here? Don't be afraid to be vulnerable. It will only make your workplace stronger. And don't forget, your North Dakota DBE services are provided at no charge to DBE certified firms. Call PSI at 605-737-0377. The point of contact is Danae Johnson, and she can also be reached via email at danae.johnson@projectsolutionsinc.com. Thank you so much for participating.